The wind on the Wyoming prairie wasn't just air. It was a character in itself, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the ghosts of 1,000 sun-bleached summers. Amelia "Millie" Vance stepped off the stagecoach in a swirl of dust and a cloud of Parisian perfume, a stark contrast to the gritty reality of Redemption Gulch. She was a reporter, sent from a world of cobblestone streets and gas lamps to write a story about the authentic American West. Her editor, a man who saw adventure in a teacup, had sent her with a single dramatic assignment: find a real old-school rancher and get a story that would sell papers. Her grand ambition, fueled by a mixture of naivete and journalistic bravado, was to propose a headline that would make her famous: "City Girl Asks Lonely Rancher to Sleep with Her or Die." Then, what happened shocked her. She hadn't thought through the "or die" part, but it sounded good in her head. The man she was looking for, Silas Thorne, was a legend whispered about in the saloon and the general store. A reclusive rancher who worked a spread so vast it was rumored to touch the horizon. They said he was as hard as the land he worked, a man who spoke more to his cattle than to people. As she walked towards the livery stable, her silk dress and leather satchel drawing curious stares, she saw him. He wasn't a legend. He was a man. Broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and sorrow, his eyes were the color of the deep, empty sky. He stood leaning against a post, his hat pulled low, a coiled rope in his hand, a solitary figure in a world of his own making. Millie, with her carefully rehearsed confidence, approached him. "Mr. Thorne." Her voice was a little too loud, a little too crisp for the dusty street. He turned, his gaze sweeping over her, a flicker of something she couldn't place. Amusement? Pity? In his eyes. She took a breath, the dramatic headline playing on a loop in her mind. "I'm a journalist, and I need a story, your story, or I'll die." The last part came out in a half-whisper, a nervous tick. Silas just looked at her, then down at her dainty shoes, a slow, disbelieving smirk spreading across his face. "Lady," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the only thing that's going to die out here is that fancy dress if you don't get out of this dust." "Yeah." He turned, his back a wall of denim and flannel, and walked away, leaving her standing there, the wind whipping her hair into her eyes, her grand plan crumbling like dry earth. Millie was not one to give up. The next morning, she was at his ranch, the sprawling, weather-beaten Thorn Creek Ranch, a place that seemed to be held together by sheer stubbornness. She found him in the corral, working with a young horse, his movements a blend of strength and patience. He didn't acknowledge her, not with a word, not with a glance. He just kept working, the rhythmic squeak of the saddle leather and the gentle snorts of the horse, the only sounds. She stood at the fence, her hands gripping the rough wood, watching him. He was a man in harmony with his world, a world she couldn't begin to comprehend. After a long silence, she spoke. "Mr. Thorne, I wasn't just trying to be dramatic. I need this. I can't go back to New York without a story. My job, my entire future, it depends on this." Her voice was softer this time, more genuine. He stopped his work, his hand resting on the horse's neck. He finally looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you want from me, reporter?" he asked, his voice low and weary. "I told you yesterday I'm not a story. I want to understand your life," she stammered, abandoning her pre-planned lines. "I want to see what it's like to live out here, to be so self-reliant." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "It's not self-reliance, miss. It's just life. It's hard and it's lonely." She felt a pang of something more than professional interest, a flicker of genuine empathy. "Then let me help," she said, surprising herself. Let me stay and work. I can write about the real thing, not some fabricated fantasy." He looked at her, a city girl in a clean dress, and then back at his worn hands, calloused and scarred. A long moment passed, stretched taut by the wind and the silence. "Fine," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "But you work, and you keep up, or you go back to the city." Millie's first days at Thorn Creek Ranch were a brutal education. She learned that a day on the prairie started before the sun and ended long after it had set. She was a quick study, but her city-bred hands blistered from the rope and the shovel. She mucked out stalls, hauled water from the well, and tried to keep up with Silas as he repaired fences that stretched for miles. She was exhausted, her body aching in places she didn't know existed, but she was also alive. The perfume was gone, replaced by the scent of hay and honest sweat. Silas, for his part, remained a man of few words. He taught her, not with instruction, but with example. He showed her how to saddle a horse with a swift, practiced motion, how to check the water lines, how to read the clouds for a coming storm. He watched her struggle, not with impatience, but with a quiet, knowing observation. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, she sat on the porch nursing a sore hand. "Why do you do it, Silas?" she asked, the formality gone. "This life, it's so much work." He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "It's the only life I know," he said simply. "And the work, it's a way of not thinking about the things you can't fix." Millie didn't push him. She knew that behind his silence was a story, a wound that had festered over time. She was no longer just a reporter looking for a headline. She was a woman trying to understand a man, a city girl getting a glimpse into a soul shaped by the vast, unforgiving land. The air between them, once filled with unspoken distance, was slowly beginning to change. It was still filled with silence, but now it was a silence of shared purpose, a quiet understanding growing in the shadow of the mountains. The storm came in with a vengeance, not a gentle rain, but a fury of wind and lashing rain that threatened to tear the roof from the old ranch house. They were inside, huddled by the fireplace, the thunder so loud it rattled the windows. Millie, despite her fear, felt a strange sense of peace. She was safe, and for the first time in her life, her well-being was tied to someone else's survival. She looked at Silas, his face illuminated by the flickering firelight. He was calm, his gaze fixed on the storm, a man who had weathered many of these before. "Silas," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the wind's roar, "what was it you couldn't fix?" He was silent for a long time, the fire crackling, the storm raging outside. He finally sighed, a deep, heavy sound. "My wife," he said, his voice rough with old grief. "She was a city girl, too. Came out here for love. But the life, it broke her. She couldn't handle the isolation, the loneliness. She died, not from a sickness, but from a broken spirit. I couldn't fix her." The words hung in the air, heavy with pain. Millie felt her heart ache for him. The loneliness she had seen in his eyes was not just a side effect of his life. It was a scar. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a simple, comforting gesture. He flinched, then relaxed, his gaze meeting hers. "I'm not her," she said softly. "I'm not broken, and you're not a failure." In that moment, the lines between reporter and subject, city girl and rancher, blurred and disappeared. The storm outside was a mirror to the storm within them, a tempest of unspoken emotions finally breaking free. They were two people, a world apart, but connected by the shared experience of pain and the quiet hope of healing. The firelight danced, casting long shadows on their faces. Two lonely souls finding a flicker of solace in the heart of the storm. If you're enjoying this story of grit, love, and life in the Old West, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories. The next morning, the world was washed clean. The sky was a brilliant, endless blue, and the air was crisp and clear. The storm had passed, but it had left something behind, a new understanding between Millie and Silas. The quiet had returned, but it was no longer a silence of distance, but of shared knowledge. They worked side by side, and the rhythm of their tasks became a kind of unspoken communication. She was getting better at the work, her hands still rough, but her movements more sure. He, in turn, was starting to open up, not in long speeches, but in small, meaningful gestures. He would point out a distant eagle or show her a particularly stubborn weed, and in doing so, he was sharing his world with her. One afternoon, as they were mending a fence, she stopped and looked at him. "You know, Silas," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I've almost forgotten about my article." He paused, a hammer in his hand. "Good," he said simply. "Maybe you're finally seeing the real story." He wasn't wrong. The story she had planned, the dramatic, sensational headline, now felt cheap and hollow. The real story was here, in the sun-bleached fields, in the quiet strength of the man beside her, in the simple, beautiful act of rebuilding something broken. She realized her initial premise was not just a journalistic ploy, but a deeper, more personal truth. She had come here to save her career, but she was now seeing that her, or die, was about more than just a job. It was about a part of her that was dying, a part that was suffocated by the rigid, artificial world she came from. Out here with Silas, she was finding something real, something that made her feel more alive than she ever had before. The day the calf got stuck in the bog, Millie didn't hesitate. She was hauling water, but when she heard the frantic bleating, she dropped the buckets and ran. The mud was thick and soupy, and the young calf was sinking, its eyes wide with panic. Silas was already there, but the ground was too unstable to get close. He was trying to figure out an angle, but the calf was panicking, thrashing and sinking faster. "I can go," she said, before he could object. "I'm smaller. I'll be less weight." He looked at her, his usual frown of concentration etched on his face, but he saw the determination in her eyes. "Be careful," was all he said. She crawled on her belly, inch by inch, the cold mud seeping through her clothes. She reached the calf, its eyes pleading. She wrapped her arms around its neck, and with Silas directing her, they used a rope to slowly pull the animal free. It was a long, messy, and exhausting process. When they finally got the calf to solid ground, it was shivering and covered in mud. Millie was in a similar state, but she was smiling, a wide, genuine smile. Silas looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something new in his eyes. Pride. He didn't say anything, but as they walked back to the house, he put a hand on her back, a simple, powerful gesture of acknowledgement. The loneliness she had seen in him was still there, a shadow, but it was now punctuated by moments of light. She realized that by helping him, by being a part of his world, she was helping him in a way she never could have imagined. She wasn't just observing a story, she was a part of it. And she was helping write a new chapter, for both of them. A late spring snowstorm, a rarity on the plains, trapped them inside for a day. The ranch house was a quiet cocoon, the world outside a blur of white. They sat by the fire, the silence a comfortable blanket between them. Millie had been living on the ranch for a month now, and she felt as if a part of her had been a ghost before. The city felt like a distant, faded memory. The scent of coffee and wood smoke filled the air, and she found the courage to ask a question that had been on her mind. "Silas," she began. What was her name? He knew who she meant without her having to say it. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "Her name was Sarah." He told her the story then in bits and pieces, a painful narrative that came out slowly, like pulling thorns from a wound. He had loved her fiercely, but he had also failed to see the signs of her unhappiness. He had been so focused on providing, on building the ranch, on being a man of the land, that he had missed the slow decay of her spirit. "I thought if I just worked hard enough, if I could give her everything, she would be happy," he said, his voice raw with regret. "But you can't build a fence around a soul." Millie listened, her heart breaking for him. She had come to the West to find a story, but she had found a man and a wound she felt compelled to help heal. She reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle but firm. "It wasn't your fault, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that came from her own heart. "You did the best you knew how. We all have scars. The brave thing isn't to pretend they're not there. The brave thing is to keep living, keep fighting." He looked at their hands, his calloused and scarred, hers still rough from her work, and for the first time the lonely rancher didn't pull away. If this story of love, loss and resilience is resonating with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful human stories. The letter came 2 days later, a stark, unwelcome interruption to their new life. It was from her editor, a final demand for her story. She hadn't forgotten the article, she had simply been too busy living it. The dramatic headline, the grand ambition, now felt so distant and trivial. She read the letter, her face a mask of conflict. Silas saw the change in her instantly. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low. She handed him the letter. He read it, his expression unreadable. "So," he said, his voice flat, "you got what you wanted. You have your story." The quiet between them was suddenly thick with old shadows. He was pulling away, the wall he had built around his heart rising again. She saw the pain in his eyes, the fear of being left, of being a story for someone else's gain. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice pleading. "The story has changed. I've changed. This isn't about some dramatic headline anymore. This is real." He didn't respond, just turned and walked away, his back a familiar, unapproachable wall. The old Silas had returned, and the new bond they had forged felt as fragile as glass. Millie felt a familiar, aching loneliness, but this time it was her own. She had a choice to make, her career, the life she had planned, or this new, uncertain and deeply meaningful connection she had found with him. The wind outside whispered through the prairie grass, a lonely sound, and she knew that the final chapter of her story, the most important one, was hers to write. Millie spent the night wrestling with her decision. She sat by the window, watching the stars, the same stars Silas had pointed out to her weeks ago. The city, with its bright artificial lights, felt like a memory from a different lifetime. Here, the darkness was vast and alive, filled with the silence of the land. She thought about her editor, the career she had worked so hard for. But then she thought about Silas, about the man who had shown her a different kind of life, a life of grit and honest work, and a love that was a slow, quiet unfolding. The next morning she found him in the barn, his shoulders slumped in a way she had never seen before. He was the lonely rancher again, the man she had met on the dusty street. She walked up to him, and her voice was firm, filled with a resolve she hadn't known she possessed. "Silas," she said, "I'm not leaving." He stopped, his movement still. He didn't turn around. "You have your story, reporter," he said, his voice tired. "Go write it." "I have my story, yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "But it's not the one I came for. The story is that a lonely rancher let a city girl stay, and in doing so he taught her how to live. The story is that he showed her a kind of strength she never knew existed. And the ending is that the city girl realized she didn't want to go back, that she wanted to stay, to fight, to build a life right here, with him." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "Silas, I'm not leaving. I'm tearing up the letter. I'm tearing up the old story, because the new one is just beginning." He slowly turned, and she saw the shock, the surprise, and a fragile, hopeful light in his eyes. Millie reached into her satchel and pulled out the letter from her editor. She held it up, and without another word, she tore it in half, then into quarters, the small pieces of paper fluttering to the hay-covered floor. Silas watched her, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning hope. The walls he had built around his heart were crumbling, piece by piece, under the weight of her simple, profound action. He walked towards her, and this time there was no distance between them. He stopped in front of her, his gaze intense. "Millie," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a sound she had never heard him use before. You're really staying?" She nodded, a single genuine tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. "I'm not going back, Silas. I can't. Not when I've found a life worth living, a man worth staying for." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her face, his touch both rough and impossibly tender. "You're not dying, are you?" he said, a small, wry smile on his face. She smiled back, a genuine, joyful expression. "No, Silas," she said, her voice filled with a love she hadn't known she was capable of. "I'm finally living." He leaned in, and in the dusty warmth of the barn, under the vast, watchful sky of the Wyoming prairie, he kissed her. It was a kiss of healing, of forgiveness, and of a future finally being built on solid, loving ground. The city girl had asked a lonely rancher to sleep with her or die, and what happened next was not what she expected at all. She didn't die. She came alive. That's it for this epic story of love and life in the American West. If you were as shocked and moved as we were by the ending, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next chapter.